She was black, dignified, and quiet, but the moment she stepped into the hotel lobby, every polished smile turned brittle. By the time she asked for a simple accommodation for her elderly mother, the manager laughed in her face and reassigned her to a windowless room near the laundry chute. The staff whispered. The concierge ignored. The dining staff served everyone else first, except her. And when she politely asked to speak with someone in charge, he looked her up and down and said, "Do you think someone like you has that kind of access?" What he didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that the woman they were dismissing held the future of the entire hotel chain in her hands. But that truth, like all great justice, waited in silence. This is not just a story about unfair treatment. It's a story about power hidden behind humility, about prejudice unmasked in the light of consequence. If you've ever been underestimated because of your skin, your voice, or your presence, stay with us. What would you have done in her place? Comment below with your thoughts and tell us where you're watching from. If stories of justice and transformation matter to you, hit subscribe and join the conversation. We're just getting started. The sun had barely crested the skyline when Tiana Brooks stepped through the revolving glass doors of the Halberd Grand, one of the most exclusive luxury hotel chains on the East Coast. She wore a slate gray trench coat cinched at the waist, her heels echoing confidently on the marble floor. Behind her, her elderly mother leaned gently against a silver-handled cane, carefully avoiding the gold-veined cracks in the polished stone. It was a long-awaited weekend away, meant to be a restful escape from the months of hospital visits and therapy sessions. Tiana had spent days coordinating the trip, ensuring everything from dietary accommodations to mobility access was approved and confirmed. Her assistant had called twice. Her emails had been acknowledged. She had even paid in advance for a corner suite with a skyline view and easy elevator access, comforts her mother deserved after all she'd endured. But as Tiana approached the front desk, she immediately noticed something off. The man standing behind the concierge podium wasn't welcoming her with the warmth that normally coated luxury hospitality. Instead, Marcus Hayes, the general manager, leaned back slightly, arms crossed, lips curled just short of a smirk. He scanned Tiana and her mother with a look too quick and too calculated. She offered a kind smile and stated her name. Marcus tapped the keyboard with sluggish fingers, eyes darting to the elderly woman's cane as if it were an inconvenience instead of an obvious sign of why accessibility mattered. "You're early," was his first comment, followed by a lazy glance toward the lobby clock. Tiana said she knew, but explained that she hoped to request early check-in given her mother's needs. Marcus chuckled, but not the warm kind. More like the kind you hear in rooms where jokes are meant to exclude. He said they didn't do exceptions, not for anyone. Tiana, unfazed, reiterated her reservation, noted the mobility requests, and asked if the accessible suite she'd booked was ready. Marcus leaned toward the monitor, frowning in a way that felt performative. After a beat, he announced that unfortunately, due to a booking shuffle, they were placing her in a standard room on the lower level. No windows, close to the supply corridor. It was the only room ready, he said, and then added with a grin that she was lucky they didn't cancel the reservation altogether given how tight the weekend schedule was. Tiana stiffened, but she didn't raise her voice. Instead, she calmly asked to see the manager, unaware the man in front of her already wore that title on his gold-plated name badge. Marcus nodded with mock politeness, then made a show of typing into the system before calling for a bellhop to escort them to their reassigned room. The bellhop arrived, silent and young, eyes flicking nervously between Tiana and Marcus as if he too understood that something wasn't right. Tiana's mother said nothing. She simply squeezed her daughter's arm, a quiet signal to stay composed, to not let this moment break the day. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into insult. The hallway to the room was dim and uninviting, the hum of a nearby HVAC unit masking the distant thud of laundry carts. When they entered, the room smelled faintly of detergent and damp wood. The air conditioner rattled. The bed wasn't even made. Tiana stood frozen for a moment, then calmly turned to the bellhop and asked for the guest services director. He paused, unsure how to respond, then offered to bring bottled water and retreated. Upstairs, Marcus was laughing with another guest, a man in a tailored suit, white mid-40s, offering him a complimentary upgrade because of a supposed loyalty mix-up. The suite with the view, the one Tiana had paid for, now had a new occupant. The two men shook hands with ease, laughing about golf, wine, and the crowds downstairs. Back in the lower level, Tiana helped her mother sit, then pulled out her phone and began forwarding her entire email chain with hotel services to a corporate contact she knew from a conference months ago. She wasn't one to make noise unless the silence would do more harm. But something about Marcus Hayes, his expression, his disregard, the way he barely concealed the disdain in his voice, had ignited a fuse she hadn't planned to light. Most importantly, the bed linens for her mother had a strong chemical scent that was irritating her lungs. Lila responded with a carefully practiced politeness, saying they were short-staffed and housekeeping would take some time, possibly later in the afternoon. Tiana, maintaining the professionalism she had refined over years in corporate boardrooms, calmly asked if it could be escalated due to her mother's medical condition. Lila apologized again, blaming shift rotations and suggesting they make do for now. Tiana thanked her and hung up. Then she sat back in the stiff back chair next to the bed and opened her laptop, pulling up the most recent presentation she had prepared for her firm. The distraction worked for about 15 minutes, until she heard a knock on a nearby door and muffled laughter. She looked through the peephole just in time to see a bellhop escorting a middle-aged couple, white, dressed in matching travel sets, into a room 2 doors down. Not 5 minutes later, another knock echoed from their hallway. This time, 2 women in housekeeping uniforms emerged from the elevator, smiling brightly as they entered the new guest suite, pushing a cart stocked with fresh towels and linen bags. Tiana stood frozen for a moment, then turned back to her mother, who had dozed off in the dim light of the television screen. The hypocrisy wasn't surprising, only confirming. Later that afternoon, the noise began. A group of young men, seemingly part of a bachelor party or some similarly self-indulgent gathering, had booked the rooms on the opposite side of the hallway. Their laughter was loud, occasionally punctuated by bursts of shouting and heavy footsteps against the walls. A bottle broke at one point. The sound of liquid splashing against tile followed. Tiana waited. First 10 minutes, then 20. When it became clear no one was going to intervene, she called the front desk again. This time, she kept her voice lower, more deliberate, careful not to let frustration leak through. She explained the noise, the concern for her mother's rest, and asked if someone from security could request they quiet down. The voice on the other end paused, then told her someone would check on it soon. 30 more minutes passed. The laughter only got louder. A slurred voice rang out from the hall, followed by the distinctive thud of someone slamming into a door that wasn't their own. Tiana stood up, walked to the threshold, opened the door slightly, and watched one of the young men stumble drunkenly past her room, shirtless, holding a beer can and shouting into his phone. She closed the door, waited another 5 minutes, and called again. This time, a different voice answered. Male. Blacks. She explained everything again. There was a pause. Then, finally, the words she had heard so many times in different forms, delivered now like an afterthought. We're aware of the situation. Please be patient. They're just excited to be here, ma'am. It's the weekend. Tiana stared at the phone for a full 10 seconds after hanging up. No apology, no commitment to act, no acknowledgement that she or her mother had any right to a quiet, safe space. She sat down slowly. Her mother stirred from the noise, asking softly if they had changed rooms yet. Tiana smiled faintly, told her everything was fine, and tucked a blanket around her shoulders. But something inside her was shifting. Not outrage, not sadness, not even the bone-deep exhaustion she'd felt before. No, this was focus, precision. She opened her laptop again and began typing notes in a clean document. The tone was clinical, structured. Every observation entered with timestamps. She wasn't documenting this for catharsis. She was building a record. An hour later, Tiana ventured out to the lobby, her face composed, voice smooth, steps deliberate. She walked up to the concierge desk again. Lila was there, fixing her lipstick behind the monitor. When she noticed Tiana, her expression slipped briefly, something between surprise and discomfort, but quickly returned to that neutral mask of detached hospitality. Tiana explained that she had made 2 noise complaints, that no action had been taken, and that this lack of resolution violated the hotel's published guest conduct standards. Lila began to respond, fumbling for the same script she had used on the phone, but Tiana held up her phone screen. On it was a recording of the noise, time-stamped, clear, and unmistakably disruptive. Her voice didn't rise. Instead, she asked simply if this was the level of service all guests received, or just the ones who booked rooms through the back entrance. Lila stiffened, then mumbled something about escalating to management. Tiana said that wouldn't be necessary. She had already escalated it. Lila blinked, confused, but Tiana didn't clarify. Instead, she turned, walked toward the elevator, and pressed the button with slow certainty. On the way up, she pulled out her phone and opened her secure messaging app, tapping out another note. Step 2 complete. Response consistent with anticipated behavior. Continued documentation. They had agreed to go to breakfast in the main dining room today. Tiana hoped, perhaps foolishly, that the morning staff might treat them better than the night crew. She guided her mother down the hall, up the elevator, and into the restaurant attached to the lobby, a space drenched in filtered morning light and dressed in minimalist elegance. The hostess, a young woman with a practiced smile, glanced at them, hesitated just long enough to suggest a calculation, then led them to a table tucked against the far wall, away from the windows, far from the center, nearly beside the swinging door to the kitchen. Tiana thanked her and helped her mother sit. As the server approached, Tiana opened the menu and quietly asked if a simple adjustment could be made. Her mother couldn't eat foods high in sodium or heavy oils. It triggered swelling and discomfort. Could they prepare the eggs without salt? Perhaps steam the vegetables instead of sautéing them? The server nodded quickly, said she would check with the chef, and vanished behind the kitchen door. Tiana poured water into their glasses and waited. Her mother leaned back, grateful to be out of the stuffy room, and admired the high ceilings above them. Minutes passed. The dining room began to fill. Tables surrounding them became occupied by well-dressed guests in tailored leisurewear and polished loafers. A couple next to them, seated by the window, asked for the same vegetable plate, but with an off-menu topping and a specific style of seasoning. Tiana heard the words clearly. The chef appeared moments later, a tall man with rolled sleeves and a thin apron tied around his waist. He stopped by the window-side couple, nodded at their request with ease, and returned to the kitchen. Shortly after, 2 artfully plated meals emerged, exactly what they asked for. Tiana's mother leaned toward her daughter. "I think that's the same dish you asked about, isn't it?" Tiana nodded slowly, lips pressed together. Another 10 minutes passed. Then a plate finally arrived at their table, but it was the standard menu item, made with butter and salt, garnished with fried onions and bacon crumbles, everything her mother couldn't eat. The server placed it down without explanation and walked away before Tiana could speak. Her mother gave her a look, a mixture of apology and restraint, but Tiana stood up, excused herself quietly, and made her way to the counter near the kitchen. She asked politely to speak to the chef. The hostess frowned, said he was busy, then reluctantly turned and disappeared into the back. Moments later, the chef emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, face unreadable. Tiana explained again calmly that she had made a dietary request and wanted to understand if it had been received. The chef shrugged, said they didn't offer custom orders, and meals were prepared as listed. She pointed gently toward the couple by the window, who were now halfway through a perfectly adjusted version of the same plate. The chef glanced at them and said, "That's a different situation." Tiana tilted her head, asked how it was different. The chef's face darkened slightly. He didn't answer. That was when Marcus entered. He must have heard her voice or been summoned by someone in the kitchen. He strode over with deliberate pace, hands clasped behind his back. His expression was a picture of exaggerated calm. "Miss Brooks, is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone louder than necessary. Tiana replied with the same grace she had maintained since she arrived. She explained the miscommunication, the inconsistency, the concern for her mother's health. Marcus smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "Well, I'm sorry if the food wasn't to your liking," he said, projecting his voice toward the nearby tables. "But perhaps next time you could try a restaurant that caters to alternative preferences." A few guests glanced over. Someone chuckled. Tiana stood her ground, asking simply if he believed honoring dietary needs was unreasonable. Marcus raised his hand slightly, stepping back as if to dismiss the entire exchange. "We're doing the best we can. If this isn't enough for you, you're always welcome to find accommodations elsewhere. We don't beg anyone to stay here." Tiana's mother, still seated, lowered her eyes. Around them, the atmosphere had changed. A waiter paused near the buffet station, frozen. A woman at another table raised her phone halfway before thinking better of it. No one intervened. Tiana looked at Marcus, not with anger, but with a sharp clinical observation, the same way she might examine a poorly managed asset before dissolving it from a portfolio. Then she turned, walked back to her mother, and helped her up. "We'll have breakfast elsewhere," she said gently. They left through the side entrance without another word. Outside, the air was cool, the sky clear. Tiana paused on the sidewalk, helped her mother into a waiting car, then stood for a moment with the door open, her thoughts already shifting toward the next step. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. She was focused. Every moment was being documented, every failure compiled. And this public humiliation cloaked in polished service, would be especially useful. She opened her phone again, added 3 new entries to the log: refusal of accommodation, evidence of selective service, managerial escalation with intent to intimidate. Then she opened a different app, one tied to the oversight department of the hospitality conglomerate that quietly owned the majority of Halberd stock. She composed a short, measured message. The subject line read, "Observation log location, discrepancy phase." The body read simply, "Sequence unfolding as projected. Pattern confirmed. Recommend phase 2 initiation pending verification of employee contracts. Upload in progress." This time, the floor supervisor, a young man named Dylan, picked up. His voice was professional, clipped, just shy of dismissive. He said the linen supply was low, that all spare blankets had already been allocated. Tiana thanked him, noted the time, 8:03 p.m., and hung up. She then returned to the chair by the bed and opened her notes. Her mother, always one to deflect, said she would be fine. Tiana didn't believe her. The tremor in her hands was subtle, but it was there. 10 minutes later, the hallway outside their room echoed with the squeak of a service cart's wheels. Tiana opened the door slightly and peered through the gap. Dylan stood across the hall, smiling as he handed a folded, plush white blanket to the woman in room 211. She accepted it gratefully, laughing about the sudden cold spell. The cart held 3 more stacked beside her pillow. Tiana closed the door. She said nothing. Her mother had fallen asleep by now, head tilted slightly, a soft wheeze rising from her chest. The next morning, after a restless night of interrupted sleep and muffled hallway noise, Tiana checked the schedule left under their door. A cleaning notice had been slipped there at some point overnight, indicating that housekeeping would be entering their room between 9 o'clock and 9:30 a.m. She found it odd. Most hotels didn't assign precise windows, but she respected the timing. At 8:55 a.m., she helped her mother dress, folded away their belongings, and wheeled her out into the corridor. Outside, the rain had returned, stronger this time, sheets of water cascading down from the rooftop. Tiana held an umbrella over her mother as they waited under the overhang for a rideshare to the nearby cafe. By the time they returned an hour later, soaked and shivering despite their efforts to stay dry, they were met with a surprise. The door to their room was ajar. A vacuum sat inside. A mop bucket was still full, yet no one was cleaning. Tiana stepped in, slowly guiding her mother past the threshold. The bed was unmade, the bathroom untouched. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew. She called down to the front desk and asked to speak to housekeeping. A woman named Brielle answered this time. Her tone was tense, practiced, and weary. She said that their room had been marked as Do Not Disturb when staff arrived, and so it had been skipped. Tiana blinked. That was impossible. She had left no such notice. She said as much, calmly but firmly. Brielle hesitated, then claimed someone must have placed the sign accidentally. The call ended with a mumbled apology and a promise to dispatch someone immediately. But it took another hour before anyone appeared. When they did, it was a different attendant, visibly confused about why the room hadn't been serviced earlier. Tiana sat at the small writing desk, watching the cleaning unfold as she sipped coffee gone cold. Her mother rested, exhausted from the morning's outing, covered in the same too-thin blanket as before. The attendant moved slowly, glancing around as though expecting something to be missing. Tiana kept notes. At 12:14 p.m., she added a line about the inconsistency of reported service times. At 12:22, she attached a time-stamped photo of the cleaning notice and a second image of the untouched supplies. Her digital record was now more than a list. It was a full dossier. Later that day, a staff member from guest services arrived with a complimentary fruit basket and a handwritten apology card signed only with initials. Tiana accepted it with a smile. Then she turned, took a photo of the items, and placed the card flat beside her laptop. Her mother reached for a banana, and Tiana helped peel it, tucking a napkin gently under her chin. She said nothing about the card, the basket, or the fact that the room still smelled faintly of cleaning solvent. The rain had finally stopped by evening. The hallway outside was quiet again, save for the occasional door slam or muffled voice. Tiana turned off the overhead light and opened the window slightly, letting in a breeze that smelled of wet concrete and spring grass. Her mother had fallen asleep early, her breathing steady now, her expression soft. Tiana closed her laptop for the night but left the charger plugged in. She stood at the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the reflection of the empty hallway behind her. Today was supposed to be her first step toward resolution. She had submitted a formal request the night before to meet with the hotel's guest relations manager. The front desk had confirmed the appointment for 10 a.m. sharp. She had even received an automated email reply from the administrative account, assuring her that the matter would be handled professionally and discreetly. That word lingered, discreetly. She had heard it before in other institutions, often used to suppress discomfort rather than resolve it. At 9:45 a.m., she wheeled her mother to the elevator, both of them dressed with understated elegance. She had chosen a fitted navy jacket over a soft white blouse, professional but not imposing. Her mother wore pearl earrings and a silk scarf knotted at the throat, her hand steady today, her gaze calm. Tiana pressed the lobby button and waited in silence, feeling the lift descend not just through floors, but through layers of insult she had yet to fully address. When they arrived at the concierge desk, the young man stationed there checked the schedule with faint disinterest. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before his face tightened slightly. After a brief pause, he looked up and informed Tiana that the guest relations manager, Ms. Jeanette Rowe, had been called away unexpectedly for an off-site executive meeting and would not be available until next week. Tiana asked if someone else in leadership could meet with her. The young man said no. She asked again, with more precision, citing policy regarding timely escalation of unresolved service complaints. He said only Ms. Rowe handled those matters directly and no one was authorized to speak in her absence. When Tiana inquired why no one had contacted her beforehand, he simply apologized for the inconvenience and offered to forward a written summary of her concerns to the general inbox. Tiana nodded once. She said nothing further. She guided her mother to a nearby sitting area, helped her settle in, then returned to the front desk, this time not to argue, but to request a printed copy of their billing ledger to date. The concierge hesitated, then clicked through the system and printed the folio. Tiana returned to the lounge chair, sat beside her mother, and unfolded the pages slowly, scanning with precision honed by years of auditing budgets, contracts, and procurement logs. She paused at line 12. Room service, filet mignon and imported wine. She hadn't ordered either. Line 16, premium spa charge, sea salt exfoliation and massage. Her mother hadn't even left the room, except for breakfast and brief walks outside. Line 24, minibar restocking, spirits and luxury snacks. She never touched the minibar. Line 29, private butler fee. No one had ever visited them apart from the housekeeping staff, and even then, inconsistently. Tiana tapped her pen slowly against the page. Each charge was small in context, but the pattern was obvious, fabricated unexplained, and strategically distributed across unrelated departments to avoid notice. She looked up from the page and scanned the lobby. The manager wasn't there, nor was Marcus. Instead, the same receptionist who had checked her in on the first day stood at the opposite end of the desk, laughing quietly with another guest, a tall man in an ivory suit and gold watch. Tiana watched them for a moment, then turned back to her laptop and opened a new document titled Fraudulent Charges, Discrepancy Log. One by one, she typed in the entries, matching timestamps with room access logs she had requested under pretense of verifying checkout timing. Most guests wouldn't know those records could be released. Tiana did. At 11:20 a.m., she returned to the desk. Her tone was professional, crisp. She presented the billing sheet and calmly requested clarification on several line items. The new staffer on duty, a woman named Bridget, took the paper with mild surprise, scanned the list, and admitted she had no knowledge of the services. She called over a supervisor, an assistant manager named Connor, who glanced at the sheet and immediately blamed the automated system. He said sometimes charges were misattributed, especially if guests in nearby rooms used shared services. Tiana asked how her room could be linked to a spa service performed 2 floors above, or a room service tray that was never delivered. Connor faltered, then offered to remove half the charges as a gesture of goodwill. Tiana declined. She wanted full removal, documentation of error, and a written apology placed on file. Connor looked uncomfortable. He said he would need time. She gave him until the end of the day. By noon, she and her mother returned to their room, where Tiana immediately uploaded her scanned folio, discrepancy notes, and audio of the conversation to a secure drive linked to the compliance division of a private legal firm her consultancy often used. She drafted a brief report and marked it. Internal escalation advised. Breach of transactional transparency, potential liability. All the facts, none of the emotion. That would come later. Her mother rested again, unaware of the latest manipulation, and Tiana sat beside her, quiet but resolute. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about one meal or one blanket or one missed appointment. It was about erosion, slow, deliberate, institutional. That erosion had a name, and that name was now attached to a file being reviewed by a partner who specialized in discrimination litigation and commercial breach. One thread, dated 2 days prior, had originated from Marcus Hayes himself, directed to department leads, regarding an upcoming influx of guests during a conference weekend. The subject line was neutral, guest flow optimization, but the content was not. He had written that certain profiles, identified by vague but coded language such as community adjacent, non-premium expectation set, and image-detracting variables, should be redistributed to the lower floors to maintain first impression integrity. He even referenced her by room number, 212A. She read it twice. The implications were clear. This wasn't a series of miscommunications or isolated errors. It was policy. Quiet, unwritten, unofficial, but institutional. The kind of directive that allowed management to claim deniability while executing discrimination with surgical precision. She folded the emails carefully and slipped them into her portfolio. Then she walked to the front desk, and asked to speak to Marcus directly. The staff hesitated, clearly caught between their routine and the tension they could feel building. But Marcus arrived soon after, hands tucked in his pockets, face as unreadable as stone. She asked to speak with a regional representative from the hotel's corporate ownership. She said it calmly, directly, with the authority of someone who knew the organizational chart better than he did. Marcus arched an eyebrow. Then he gave a slow smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. He asked, in a voice that echoed across the marble floor, if she thought she had that kind of access. If she believed herself important enough to command that kind of attention. His tone was amused, condescending, calculated to wound. Tiana said nothing at first. She merely looked at him, her silence stretching long enough to make him shift his weight slightly, as if uncertain what reaction to expect. Then she told him that she was documenting his words, that every moment since check-in had been recorded, archived, and cross-referenced with policy documents from the chain's public site. She told him flatly that he had violated not only ethical expectations, but federal lodging regulations regarding equitable service distribution. He blinked then just once. Not fear, not guilt, just surprise. That she had teeth, that she had waited so patiently to bear them. He dismissed her again, said if she had complaints, she could file them online. That was procedure. She smiled faintly, thanked him for the clarification, and returned to her room. There, she helped her mother settle in for the night, checked her vitals, offered warm tea, and dimmed the lights. Then she returned to her laptop. She scanned the email printouts into a secure folder and attached them to her already growing internal report. She added a new section, corporate chain of command notification triggers. She filled it out with times, actions taken, and documented personnel present. The last entry she wrote simply said, "Initiate escalation protocol. Attach direct evidence. Confirm chain integrity." She drafted a message to the parent group's executive oversight board, citing misconduct, discriminatory guest routing, and intentional reputational shielding through manipulation of guest visibility. The message was precise, supported by legal citation, and ended with a request for a direct call with any member of the Internal Ethics Committee. She didn't ask for anything else. No compensation, no rebooking, no appeasement. She wasn't interested in customer recovery. She was interested in accountability. She scheduled the email to send at 6 a.m., just as East Coast offices would open. She slept briefly after that, a short, dreamless rest wrapped in the stillness of knowing the fight had already shifted. No longer was she reacting. Now, the initiative was hers. At dawn, the rain had stopped, but the humidity hung low in the air. She awoke to a message on her phone. It was short. "We received your report. A senior inquiry is now underway. Please remain available for further correspondence." She exhaled slowly. Her mother was already awake, seated beside the window, watching birds pick at crumbs on the concrete below. Tiana brought her tea and crouched beside her chair. Her mother smiled, the fatigue in her eyes still evident, but her spirit unbowed. Tiana said they would be going home soon, but not before things were made right. Downstairs, the staff seemed different. Stiffer. Less laughter. More whispers. The front desk agents avoided her eyes. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Tiana stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the rooftop lounge, a place they'd never been invited to access, despite asking earlier in the week. Today, the button worked. The door opened on a space filled with sunlight, glass walls, and silence. She didn't stay long. Just enough to see the view. Just enough to know what had been withheld. Word had spread quietly but swiftly. The regional director had arrived. Human resources from corporate had called ahead. The front office was instructed to hold all internal meetings and prepare full staff reports by midday. Marcus hadn't been seen since the evening before, and although no one dared say it aloud, they all sensed something was unraveling. In room 212A, Tiana sat at the edge of the bed, her portfolio open across her lap, reviewing one last time the documents she had assembled over 5 days of endurance. Her mother, already dressed, rested near the window, her hands folded in her lap. The phone on the nightstand buzzed. It was a notification from the oversight team. Meeting confirmed, 11 a.m., conference suite level 3. Tiana stood, buttoned her blazer, and helped her mother into her wheelchair. They moved through the hallway together, past staff who suddenly stood straighter and avoided eye contact, past guests who smiled politely, unaware that anything beneath the surface had changed. In the elevator, Tiana checked the packet one final time. Internal correspondence, audio logs, photographic documentation, guest policy alignment charts, and the final page, her shareholder registration certificate issued by the parent group's private trust. She and her mother entered the conference suite precisely on time. Inside were 3 executives, 2 men and 1 woman, all flown in that morning from corporate. The woman, Vanessa Hill, was the current chief operations officer for the brand. Her posture was rigid, but her eyes were sharp. She greeted Tiana with a handshake, then paused when Tiana introduced herself in full. The moment Tiana retrieved the certificate from her folder and laid it on the polished glass table, silence overtook the room. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Vanessa's gaze scanned the document. Then her expression shifted from formality to something closer to alarm. Tiana spoke calmly, clearly. She explained that this trip had not been leisure, though it was framed as such. It had been a field audit, conducted under full discretion, authorized months ago by a vote of the executive board. Her position as majority shareholder had been intentionally undisclosed to preserve authenticity of experience. She had selected this property due to a trend in complaints from anonymous surveys and regional discrepancies in service ratings. Her assignment had been simple: immerse, observe, document. She described the events day by day: the room reassignment without justification, the denial of basic accommodations, the selective housekeeping delays, the fabricated billing charges, the manipulation of access to management, and the final breach, the email from Marcus Hayes categorizing guests by coded racial and socioeconomic bias. She placed the email printouts on the table. Vanessa didn't touch them at first. Then she leaned forward and began to read. One of the executives asked quietly, "You're saying this was all planned? That you intended to test the system from within?" Tiana nodded once. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And, unfortunately, the system failed at every level." Vanessa asked to see proof of identity, and Tiana handed over her shareholder ID, matching signatures, and encrypted access to the ownership ledger. Everything was authenticated. No further questions were needed. From the corner of the room, a junior assistant stood frozen, wide-eyed. He had been tasked with managing the coffee service, but was now silently witnessing the moment when hierarchy collapsed in reverse. Tiana turned to Vanessa and said plainly that the brand's integrity was not a slogan. It was a structure. And when cracks like this were allowed to form at the base, the collapse was not theoretical. It was inevitable. Vanessa asked what she wanted done. Tiana replied that the decision was no longer about what she wanted. It was about what the brand owed to its guests, to its staff, and to itself. As the meeting adjourned, word began to trickle to the lower levels. Staff were summoned, told to prepare statements. A temporary corporate manager was installed within the hour. HR investigators began closed-door interviews with everyone from housekeeping to food services. Legal sent observers. IT began preserving server logs. The general manager's office was locked pending internal audit. Meanwhile, Tiana and her mother returned to their room. It had been cleaned thoroughly. A new set of blankets had been placed at the foot of the bed. On the desk was a letter from Vanessa herself, printed on embossed stock and signed in ink. But Tiana barely looked at it. She wasn't interested in gestures. She opened her laptop, filed a new entry in her personal compliance log, and sent a short message to the ethics board. Status acknowledged. Phase 3 complete. Her mother asked if everything was resolved. Tiana smiled softly and said not yet, but it had begun. And that was enough for now. In the hallway outside, voices rose in tension, an assistant manager being questioned, a concierge nervously explaining protocol. The ripple effect began within hours of a closed-door meeting. By mid-afternoon, the corporate crisis team had mobilized, their arrival marked by dark sedans and quiet urgency. Compliance officers moved through the building with folders, checklists, and sharp eyes. The hotel lobby, once a stage for curated hospitality, now resembled a corporate investigation site. Staff huddled in corners, whispering names, timelines, excuses. A printed notice was taped to the staff bulletin board reading all department heads to report to Conference Suite C by 3 p.m. The tone was unmistakable. This was no longer about recovery. It was about accountability. Meanwhile, in her room, Tiana prepared her next move. She connected her laptop to a secured virtual portal tied to the Hospitality Ethics Conference scheduled for broadcast that evening. The conference, a nationwide forum on inclusivity in luxury service, had offered Tiana a keynote slot weeks prior, a slot she had originally declined, planning instead to observe anonymously. Now, everything had changed. She uploaded a video compilation, time-stamped clips of each moment since check-in. The denied room request, the dismissive staff, the falsified charges, the restaurant incident, the hallway surveillance showing the selective service behavior. The final clip displayed Marcus Hayes in the lobby, smirking as he belittled her request to speak with upper management. Overlaid subtitles read, "Do you think you're important enough for that?" At exactly 6 p.m., the broadcast began. Tiana's segment aired during peak traffic. The introduction was brief, a first-hand account from one of the most powerful women in hospitality, captured without warning, without filter. Then came silence. Then came the truth. Thousands of viewers, hotel executives, mid-level managers, front desk agents, and investors, watched in stunned quiet as the footage rolled. It wasn't rage that spread. It was realization. This wasn't fiction. This was the mirror. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Hashtag silent audit. Hashtag hospitality without justice. Hashtag power in plain sight. News outlets picked up. Guests in other properties began asking questions. Calls flooded corporate. Emails demanded statements. By 6:45 p.m., Vanessa Hill, now seated with 3 senior executives in the same conference room where Tiana had spoken earlier, received a direct call from a board. The directive was clear: act decisively or risk the collapse of stakeholder confidence. At 7:10 p.m., Vanessa entered the operations suite. Marcus Hayes was seated behind his desk, composed but visibly tense. Vanessa presented a document, a formal notice of immediate suspension pending internal inquiry. She informed him that his access to all systems was revoked, his keys deactivated, and his personal effects would be boxed and delivered. Marcus tried to protest, asked if there had been a misunderstanding. Vanessa simply placed a tablet on his desk and pressed play. He watched himself on the screen, eyes narrowing, expression falling. No further explanation was needed. He stood slowly, then removed his name badge, placed it on the desk, and left without another word. Elsewhere in the hotel, similar confrontations unfolded. The head of food and beverage, responsible for denying Tiana's dietary request while fulfilling others, was relieved of duty and escorted out by security. The floor manager, who had stalled her housekeeping services, was asked to submit a formal resignation. The night supervisor, who rerouted her room assignment, received notice of probation, pending retraining and full departmental audit. Every staff member who had signed off on fabricated charges had their actions logged, with several referred to the legal team for potential fraud. Tiana remained silent throughout the purge. She hadn't asked for public firings. She hadn't asked for spectacle. But she also hadn't intervened. This was no longer personal. This was procedural. At 8:15 p.m., she received a message from the broadcast coordinator. "You've started a movement," it read. "We've never had engagement like this. Industry-wide discussion panels are forming. Some properties have already requested your framework for internal audit." Tiana replied simply, "Send them the full model. All 10 stages. No edits." Her mother, watching from the chair near the window, smiled quietly. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She could feel it in the air. The heaviness that had lingered all week had begun to lift. By 9 p.m., local news crews had gathered outside the hotel entrance. A spokesperson from corporate gave a brief statement, citing a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory practices and reaffirming the brand's commitment to ethical service. Behind her, staff moved silently, eyes lowered, the weight of consequence settling on them like storm clouds. Inside the building, The guests remained largely unaware of the internal reckoning taking place just beneath the surface. Room service continued. Valet returned cars. But those who worked behind the scenes now understood that the system had been watched, tested, and found wanting. Tiana logged off her laptop and began packing. Her mother's belongings were already folded neatly. Tomorrow they would leave, not out of anger, but with purpose completed. She walked once more through the lobby before retiring for the night, the same lobby where she had once stood invisible. Now, I watched her pass. Not with pity, not with admiration, with awareness. Her presence had rewritten the rules, exposed the invisible architecture of exclusion, and reminded the industry that silence, once recorded, becomes evidence. And evidence demands response. How many other guests had experienced the same silent disregard? How many employees had enabled the culture because it served their position? Investment analysts followed swiftly. Stock in the parent company dipped by 4% before noon. Multiple shareholders released public statements distancing themselves from the property and calling for an independent audit across all branches. A mid-sized pension fund issued a freeze on further investments until a full compliance review could be completed. 2 major corporate clients quietly canceled their long-term contracts for hospitality conferences. The industry had seen crises before: economic downturns, security breaches, logistical failures. But this was different. This was human. This was structural. And it was indefensible. Marcus Hayes received formal notice that he was banned from employment within the hospitality sector across the state, as per the Ethics Board's recommendation and in compliance with the industry code. His professional license was placed under permanent review. His name became a cautionary tale in training slides about accountability and oversight. Former colleagues deleted his contact from their phones. Even those who had once defended his decisiveness now cited their discomfort in hindsight. It was as if everyone had been waiting for permission to disavow what they had tolerated. Marcus himself remained silent. No press statement, no apology, just absence. But the vacuum left behind by his departure was quickly filled by a broader movement. Tiana's video presentation had not only exposed an individual, it had catalyzed a wave of inquiries across the entire hospitality industry. Properties from New York to San Diego began re-evaluating their training programs. Several chains launched third-party bias audits. For many, it was the first time they had looked inward and found discomfort staring back. Tiana did not linger to celebrate. She and her mother departed the hotel without ceremony, slipping into a quiet car at dawn, their silhouettes outlined by the golden light of a rising sun. Behind them, the property stood still, its polished walls now hollow echoes of a hospitality it had failed to honor. In the weeks that followed, Tiana focused her energy not on dismantling systems, but on rebuilding something better. She held private meetings with key stakeholders in the education and training sector of hospitality. She met with foundations, corporate sponsors, and public advocates. Then she announced the formation of the Eleanor Initiative, a national scholarship and mentorship program for underrepresented voices in hotel and hospitality management, named after her mother. The initiative's mission was simple: to identify talent overlooked by bias, to train leadership grounded in empathy and professionalism, and to create a new generation of managers who understood that hospitality was not just about service, but about dignity. The announcement was made at a private press event hosted at a separate hotel in Atlanta, one unaffiliated with the chain involved in the scandal. Tiana spoke briefly, her words measured, her tone resolute. "I don't want to destroy the industry," she said. "I want to restore its purpose." The response was overwhelming. Within 72 hours, the Eleanor Initiative had received over 1,000 applications and more than $200,000 in seed donations. Industry leaders pledged internship opportunities, corporate training programs, and housing partnerships. One prominent CEO remarked, "It's not just a scholarship, it's a mirror held up to us all." As for the original hotel, it underwent sweeping reform. A new general manager was appointed from outside the company. an executive known for diversity training and organizational transformation. Staff were required to complete a 10-week ethics and equity course, certified by a neutral compliance firm. A new guest experience team was created, composed of employees previously relegated to back-of-house positions. Even the decor was altered. The marble lobby remained, but now a framed plaque near the entrance read, "Every guest has a story. Every guest deserves respect." Behind the scenes, Tiana continued to monitor progress. She received bi-weekly reports from compliance. She offered to return in 1 year, not as an anonymous guest, but as herself, to speak directly with the new team. Some of the staff who had once looked past her now wrote to her privately, expressing remorse, reflection, and even gratitude. She responded to every message, never with judgment, only with honesty. She told them that accountability wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Some might never return to the industry. Others would rise stronger because of it. 12 months later, the world that had once ignored a silent injustice now stood in quiet reverence as the annual Workplace Equity Forum unfolded inside the gleaming glass atrium of the Eleanor Convention Center in Chicago. The event had grown far beyond its original concept. It was no longer just a training summit or a networking opportunity. It had become a movement. The banner stretched across the main auditorium read with bold, uncompromising clarity, "Equity is not a favor. It is a right." Tiana stood at the side of a stage, calm, composed, watching the final keynote speaker approach the podium. She had just delivered her own address 20 minutes earlier, walking the audience through a new data model that tracked measurable shifts in workplace bias reduction, mentorship equity, and corporate policy redesign across 27 partner institutions. The applause had been warm, but it wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the change. Now in front of a crowd of almost 600 people, executives, educators, interns, and policymakers, a familiar face stepped onto the stage. Her name was Lila Grant. Her badge read program graduate, and beneath it, in smaller print, read former front desk manager. A low murmur passed through the room, not of recognition, but of curiosity. Lila paused at the mic, adjusted it slightly, then took a breath. She introduced herself with honesty, offering a brief but unflinching recount of her role in a story that had, as she said, taught her how easily kindness is corrupted by silence. She explained what had happened that week at the Halberd Grand, how she had followed the unwritten rules, how she had watched, hesitated, and failed to intervene when it mattered most. Then, with hands that trembled just slightly, she admitted she had judged a guest not by policy, but by appearance. And that decision, she said, reshaped the course of her entire life. Lila shared how she had left the hotel soon after the incident, how the public backlash and internal shame had forced her to reckon with not only her actions, but the values she had never questioned. She described her application to the Eleanor Initiative's education program, not out of pity, but with hope for change. She had been accepted, enrolled, and completed the curriculum with distinction. Now, she led regional workshops on inclusive guest experience and trained others on what she called ethical reflex, the moment when a person chooses to speak instead of comply. The room remained silent throughout her speech. And when she finished, she turned toward the side of the stage, locking eyes with Tiana, and bowed her head slightly, not in submission, but in gratitude. Tiana nodded back, a quiet affirmation of something both women now understood. Change is real when it's earned. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed and the stage was disassembled, Tiana walked the back corridor alone, heading toward the service exit where her car was waiting. A figure stood near the door, tall, grayer than before, with eyes that had once been filled with calculation, but now held something quieter. It was Marcus Hayes. He looked smaller out of his suit, wearing simple clothes, holding a visitor's badge clipped awkwardly to his shirt. He didn't approach at first. He waited until she noticed him. Then he spoke. His voice was softer than she remembered. He told her he had spent the last year working with a nonprofit that provided trauma-informed customer service training for formerly incarcerated individuals entering the workforce. He had started as a volunteer. Now he taught weekly sessions. He said he hadn't come to reclaim anything. He wasn't here to ask for approval or acceptance. He simply wanted her to know that the man who had laughed at her a year ago no longer existed. He was gone, buried under months of reflection, of rebuilding, of choosing to face what he had once denied. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written by hand, dated 3 months earlier, but never sent. In it, he apologized, not for the sake of forgiveness, but because truth required witness. Tiana read the first few lines, then folded it neatly and placed it in her bag. She looked at him and said that people change when they are brave enough to confront who they've been. Then she told him something unexpected. There was a program launching soon through the Eleanor Initiative, designed for former industry professionals seeking redemption through action. It was called Framework. It wasn't glamorous. It paid nothing, but it meant something. If he was willing, she said, they would be honored to have him as a volunteer. Marcus didn't respond at first. He only nodded, eyes damp but steady. Then he turned, opened the door, and stepped into the night. Tiana remained for a moment longer, breathing in the cool air that rolled off the lakefront. She thought of her mother, now resting at home, sending her messages each morning to ask how the students were doing. She thought of the young woman who had once stood alone in a lobby, surrounded by polished stone and hollow courtesy. That woman was still here, but she was no longer waiting for permission to be seen. She had turned the gaze outward, and the world had blinked. Across the city, lights lit up glass buildings, reflecting a skyline she had helped reshape. Not with anger, but with structure. Not with vengeance, but with clarity. And now, from those structures, something better was growing. The end. If this story moved you, take a moment to support more narratives like it by subscribing to the channel and sharing it forward. What part of Tiana's journey impacted you the most? Was it the silent endurance, the moment she revealed her power, or the choice to offer redemption? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us which twist stayed with you and where in the world you're watching from. Your voice matters in stories like this.